There is a lot happening as the tragedy in California continues. It is tempting to say that everything happening with these California fires is an act of God. Of course, partially that is correct. There's the Santa Ana winds. And for anybody that has landed or tried to land a plane in the Santa Ana winds, you know that it is truly an act of God when that happens. But this is much deeper than that. This is not an act of God. What you are seeing in California is man-made. What you are seeing in California is not from the heavens. It is a decision. It is a choice. What you are seeing in California is a sequence of decisions. Let's put that B-roll up, please, guys, on screen. It is a series of political decisions that have happened over a period of time. This scale of destruction of what we are seeing in Pacific Palisades, what we're seeing in Pasadena, what we're seeing all across Los Angeles County, is because of intentional political decisions. This is not an act of God. This is the lack of action from man. Number one, the inability or the unwillingness to clean up the brush. Environmentalists say, no, you can't clean up the brush. You might disrupt a local rabbit. There might be a local grasshopper that will get offended. At the root of environmentalism is that human beings do not come first. And what you are looking right at there on screen, that is not Dresden. That is the Pacific Palisades. Every house is eliminated. I am now up to 15 people that I know personally that have completely lost their homes, lost everything that they own. 15 people, and I could show you some of the pictures, and you're seeing it up on screen. Not cleaning up the brush because the environmentalists. And of course, the biggest one, number two, is the water. Gavin Newsom, who should resign in disgrace for his handling of these fires, has refused to allow the fresh water that comes from the heavens, act of God, to be captured and put in reservoirs to be able to fight the fires. We have videos of firefighters using women's purses to try and put out the fires. Gavin Newsom actively dismantled 4 dams. Gavin Newsom went out of his way to dismantle and pick apart 4 dams in the Los Angeles area. And then, of course, number 3, which is that California has been the petri dish. It has been the Wuhan Institute of Virology for the woke mind virus. California is where all of the diversity, equity, inclusion, critical race theory, LGBTQIA plus ideology has been festering. And it turns out when you need to fight a fire, it doesn't matter if your fire chief is gay, black, lesbian, trans. It matters whether or not you have a capable firefighting force. And they have intentionally tried to drive out all of the white people from the firefighting force in Los Angeles. Oh, we don't need white men to fight fires. So they have a fish first policy. They have a let's not offend the grasshopper policy. Turns out when you have to fight a fire and you prioritize things that don't matter above things that do matter, don't be shocked when your city burns to a crisp. Play cut 66.
The Fire Department is launching its first ever Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau. It is dedicated to ensuring a fair and equal workplace environment.
Every day, the LAFD is called upon to respond to crises, and today it is taking a step to resolve one of its own. The department's first ever Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau will launch in January, 1 year since its first ever female fire chief, Kristen Crowley, was appointed.
So by creating this new bureau, our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Bureau, now we actually have the staff to do the work when it comes to doing a deep dive in regard to how we do business, how we take care of one another in the fire stations and in our work environment.
The plan is to do so by adding training and enforcing accountability.
So again, this is not a joke. This is who is running your fire response. 0% contained in the Palisades, 0% contained in Pasadena. And this is exactly what Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, And they cut the fire budget in Los Angeles by $23 million. The Los Angeles fire budget was cut, and hundreds of hydrants were stolen for scrap before the fires. The homeless get more money than the fire department. So you have this kind of perfect storm of wokeism, and that is what you're seeing. Let's see more B-roll, by the way, of all the burning. What you are seeing right there is a perfect storm of wokeism. We can't take the water because of the Delta smelt. We can't clean up the brush because of the grasshoppers. We can't put out the fire because guess what? When you start to prioritize diversity and sexuality over merit, things tend to not go well. This is exactly what we have been warning about as conservatives. As conservatives, we've been warning about this for years. Hey, when a tragedy strikes, it doesn't matter how many diversity points you have. Remember Pete Buttigieg trying to figure out the flight crisis, that disaster? And what is the response from Gavin Newsom? The same thing that they'll say anytime that there is a police killing. Ooh, systemic racism. They just say climate change. Define the term, Gavin Newsom. Define the term. What do you mean by climate change exactly? Was it climate change that decided not to capture the water and put it into a reservoir? Was it climate change that decided not to clean up the brush? Or no, instead it was the opposite. It was the cult of earth-worshiping environmentalism. Your ideology is why your people are suffering. This is a choice. This is not an act of God. It is an act of man. And Gavin Newsom, you better preserve your documents, because I sure hope that Pam Bondi and President Trump open a robust criminal investigation into Gavin Newsom and Mayor Bass, because in 10 days and 23 hours, you might be facing a very serious federal criminal investigation because you deserve it. This is beyond gross negligence. You might be complicit for the murder and arson of your own citizens. So preserve your documents, Gavin Newsom. Instead of cleaning the forest floors and removing dead trees, rain runoff, and making sure California has water in fire hydrants, Democrat politicians will instead deflect responsibility and blame climate change. This magical blame shifting allows them to avoid accountability for their incompetence and mismanagement while wielding tyrannical power over voters, harassing them for cooking on gas stoves, forcing them to drive electric vehicles, and charging them a carbon tax for simply living. Human lives are not improved by this. They are destroyed. Cities lie in actual rubble. And taxpayers and insurance policyholders around the country are on the hook to clean up their failed, far-left, dystopian disaster. And I'm not joking. There needs to be criminal investigations into this. Gavin Newsom closed 4 dams. Karen Bass is in Ghana, or she was, and she came back. Do we have Karen Bass just completely freezing up? What cut is that? They ask her this question. She can't even answer it. Again, there were warnings and warnings and warnings about this. And guess what? Somebody get your hat. Trump was right about everything. President Trump went on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he was so mocked by this. Listen carefully. He was so attacked and mocked for this. Play cut 106.
They said, we have no water. I said, do you have a drought? No, we don't have a drought. I said, why don't you have no water? Because the water isn't allowed to flow down. It's got a natural flow from Canada all the way up north of water, more water than they could ever use. And in order to protect a tiny little fish, the water up north gets routed into the Pacific Ocean. Millions and millions of gallons of water gets poured. I could have water for all of that land, water for your forests. You know, your forests are dry as a bone.
Yeah.
Okay?
Dangerous.
That water could be routed. You know, you could have everything. Oh, not only dangerous, billions of dollars a year they spend on forest fires. And, you know, there's a case with the environment. They're not allowed to rake their forests because you're not allowed to touch it. And all they have to do is clean their forest, meaning rake it up, get rid of the leaves, get rid of, leaves that are sitting there for 5 years. And
we'll certainly get rid of the dead fall.
And get rid of the trees that have fallen that, are like.
You can't clean up the trees or the brush. Everybody in LA knows it, but because you might upset the natural habitat of the grasshoppers. Donald Trump is running on America first and Americans first. The Democrats run on Delta smelt first and grasshoppers first. It is tempting to want to implement diversity, equity, inclusion. Oh, we must be very equitable. However, when there's just a little stress test, things start to fall apart. In 10 days and 23 hours, President Trump becomes president. Just imagine how unfit our military is right now. And we've been warning about that for quite some time. This feckless response that we are seeing on the ground in the Palisades and all across California is a microcosm of a larger cancer and a tumor that President Trump is going to have to take a scalpel and remove. Environmentalists have weaponized the Endangered Species Act. They basically invent subspecies that are actually part of a much more common one so they can justify blocking development. Environmentalists are earth worshipers. They're inherently anti-progress, anti-growth. They're inherently against human flourishing. To them, this fire is just karma for all of modernity's development against them. Just the other day, the New York Times admitted that the snail darter wasn't even a real species, and it blocked development for years. The New York Times wrote, "This tiny fish mistaken identity halted a dam's construction." Scientists say the snail darter, whose endangered species status delayed the building of a dam in Tennessee, is a genetic match of a different fish. So they just invent subspecies they invent subspecies to prevent development. I want to hear from you, freedom@charliekirk.com. There needs to start to be investigations of public officials. By the way, let's just get the record straight. If Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, is under multiple federal indictments for taking free flights on Turkish Airlines, it's not too much to say that Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, should face federal charges for letting her city burn. The Palisades are gone, but the grasshoppers, ironically, the grasshoppers probably all died too. This is tragic stuff. And the lack of leadership from Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. We have this piece of tape. We'll play it in a second. Karen Bass doesn't even know how to answer. Did anyone check the water levels? This is not complicated stuff. You do not need a PhD in astrophysics to figure this out. Do we have water levels? Do we have the ability to respond to tragedy? Did we clean up the brush? When you start focusing on the distant and the ideological, and you don't understand the immediate, civilization ends. And the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, was an organizer for the Marxist Venceremos Brigade, who supported Fidel Castro. She visited Cuba 8 times as a young woman. Outside of politics, her main job was a community organizer. This is the embodiment of left-wing ideology. This is the manifestation of the woke. You can't put out fires. This is peak woke. Play cut 125.
Do you owe citizens an apology for being absent while their homes were burning? Do you regret cutting the fire department budget by millions of dollars, Madam Mayor? Have you nothing to say today?
Can you back up, please? Appreciate it.
Have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today? Elon Musk says that you're utterly incompetent. Are you considering your position?
That's the first time I saw that piece of clip. Did she not hear the question? What's the? It looks like she was on some sort of plane gate terminal. Is that right? $500 million budget deficit. When these fires broke out, Bass was on a pleasure trip all the way in Ghana, in Africa, to visit the inauguration of the country's new president. That visit was paid for with taxpayer funds. Los Angeles has a budget deficit of almost $500 million. If your city doesn't have a balanced budget, the number of diplomatic trips should go to 0. I live in Phoenix, by the way. I was just talking to a realtor. He said he is getting inundated with calls right now of people from California that say, we're done, we're leaving, we're done. And I do not wish harm on anybody because of their politics. I don't. However, for every person that has advocated, raised money, bundled, and donated to Democrats, you are living in the tragedy of your own making. And you guys were told by the New York Times, the Washington Post, right-wing people like Elon Musk and right-wing people like Charlie Kirk are making it seem like woke ideologies doesn't harm you. And now you don't have a driveway. And now everything you own is gone. We were fear-mongering. We were pouncing. Republicans pounce. We're too divisive. Turns out we were right. It turns out all of you in this audience were right. It turns out that every single one of us. And I got to be honest, though, there's a lot of American first and patriots that no longer have homes, too. I know of 15 conservative people, some of which that work on our team that I mentioned yesterday, their entire home is gone. And again, I do not take delight in anybody's suffering. I do not take joy in people's misery. And I do feel sorry for them. But I hope some of these Democrats that now everything they own is gone. Look at that. So, and look, I don't want to overly politicize this. Blake, can you pull up the precinct map of how Pacific Palisades voted? Let's just go straight at the third rail of this whole thing. It's 80-20 Democrat. Am I right? Let's get the precinct map. Let's make sure we get it right. I want the New York Times precinct map. No one deserves to suffer because of their politics. However, if you have voted a certain way, this is what you wanted. This used to be a conservative area back in the 1950s. 8 out of 10 of those houses you're seeing are left-wing Democrats. 8 out of 10. And that's a tragedy. They don't deserve it. They're American citizens. They deserve help. But they advocated for this. They donated to Joe Biden. They raised money for Kamala Harris. And this is why politics matters. And this is why when these pastors and these good-for-nothing people will come up to me, oh, Charlie, I'm tired of politics. Well, if you don't get politics right, you don't have a home. This is 100% a byproduct of your willingness or your unwillingness to engage in the political arena. And when California, in a couple of weeks, comes crawling back for federal assistance, Trump should say, listen, I'm not going to give you a dime unless you fire the Christians. You mandate the proper forest management and stop controlled burns that Newsom has stopped. You cut it out with California's failed diversity, equity, inclusion, homeless spending. You require water capture instead of flushing it into the ocean. We're not going to pay for this anymore. This is your own making. When Florida gets hit by a hurricane, FPL, Florida Power and Light, has power coming back in a couple days. They also build their homes in a certain way to be hurricane-proof. California, they're so left-wing, they're so liberal, they're so out of touch, they're so earth-worshipping. And now entire neighborhoods are gone, as if an atomic bomb was dropped. In 2020, Pacific Palisades voted 70% for Joe Biden. So it's 70-30. This looks like Ukraine, not our own country. Oh, but it's funny you mentioned that because Joe Biden and Senate Republicans have sent a lot of money to Ukraine, a lot. In fact, we spent $250 billion to Ukraine. This is the current ruling class regime. And by the way, didn't you know this? The Los Angeles Fire Department just donated surplus supplies to Ukraine. Don't take my word for it. James Woods, who has become a really good friend, said, hey, the fire truck pulled up to try to put out the fire in front of his home. Turns out there was no water. But there is a lesbian fire chief. Which one would you rather have? Water, lesbian fire chief. Lesbian, fire chief, water. Play cut 124.
Laura, with all due respect, if it is true that things were handled this way, if it is true that Gavin Newsom is the absolute blithering idiot that I believe he is in the way he has handled fire management in this state again and again and again and again, this isn't a wake-up call. This is the kind of thing they have tribunals for, where they try people and say, you had an oath of office to perform certain duties. When you're the fire chief, this isn't a social justice exercise that you're in charge of. This is you getting water to areas that need water because there are fires in 100-mile-an-hour winds, burning houses to the ground. I watched on a Ring camera a guy have to sit and watch his pet burn to death. You know, those things are issues of the heart when you watch a cherished little pet. Or, you know, look, my home is a building. It was we worked 3 years putting the home together. We loved our little house, but it means nothing compared to the 5 people who lost their lives.
James Woods is an American hero. By the way, he went to MIT. He's brilliant. Let's put that up on screen here. I want you just to see this. No one deserves the tragedy, but they did invite tragedy to their home. This is how the precincts of Palisades and California voted. There is not a single red precinct in sight. Do you see that? There is not a single red. In fact, it's as blue as it gets. Oh, yeah, sure. We don't care if we have water. Black Lives Matter. Oh, yeah, we don't care if that we don't clean up the brush. Diversity is our strength. Oh, yeah. We don't care if we have a fire chief that knows how to turn on the fire truck. In this house, we believe. These are the same people that were chasing you through the street because you decided to go for a walk in the park without a mask on. That right there is how all of these neighborhoods voted. And I don't take delight in it. In fact, I take sadness when I see this. You should be sad looking at that. And yes, there are a lot of exceptions to people. 20 to 30% of those neighborhoods are people that I know. As I mentioned, our dear friend Stacy, her home is just gone. I have other friends, I'm not going to say on air, entire home's gone. Other people that I know, family members, entire home's gone. Gone. So there's exceptions. But the majority, the vast majority, 7 out of 10 of the people in those neighborhoods, they said, bring it on. The question has always been, when will people in California wake up? We thought it would be when a homeless man is taking a crap in your front yard. Maybe now the wake-up call will be when you don't have a front yard. You know that sign is the in this house we believe Black Lives Matter and women's rights are human rights and no human is illegal and science is real, love is love and kindness is everything. Let's put this up. The dark truth and humor of that sign is that sign means nothing if you don't have a house.